Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will discuss how to best improve the workforce to be more cyber resilient. My name is Kirsten Patton. I'm a performance consultant at Dale Carnegie in Tampa Bay. We offer training for soft skills and leadership development for government and industry. And I have the pleasure of moderating ATARC's panel today. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. ATARC is a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. ATARC provides ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees at home, and a special thanks to Brianne Armit and Kelly Lee, as well as the entire Pure Storage and Veeam team. This afternoon, we are going to hear from our panelists, followed by a Q&A. We will pop in a few polls as we go, and we will also answer your questions. That being said, before we begin, I really want to encourage our audience at home to please submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform, and also be sure to answer the poll questions in order to ensure that you receive your CPE credits. With that, I would like to welcome our panelists to please come on camera and go ahead and unmute yourself. We're going to begin with a round of introductions. I see Nick first, so we'll start with you, Nick. If you could please share with us who you are, your role, where you work, and anything else relevant to our audience today.
Well, thank you, Kirsten, and thank you to the audience and my fellow panelists for being here today. I'm Nick Saki. I'm the Principal Technologist for the Office of the CTO covering North American Public Sector for Pure Storage. And I am the technical liaison and strategic advisor for our customers and our prospects in their data service infrastructure and digital transformation goals.
Fantastic, thank you. Let's jump over to Sherilyn next.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me on this panel today. So my name is Sherry Pasco. I'm a senior technology policy advisor at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. I recently joined NIST after more than a decade on the Senate Commerce Committee, and my responsibilities over at NIST include advising the leadership on kind of technology policy and strategy, including cybersecurity. I also lead the NIST cybersecurity framework program and will be overseeing the framework update towards CSF 2.0. So if you have questions about the framework update, please ask. But looking forward to the conversation today. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. It's so good to have you here. Thank you. Let's jump over to Gary next.
Yes, my name is Gary Stevens. I am the acting CIO for the Department of Education. In that role, I work with our internal and external mission partners to ensure that the Department of Education mission gets executed holistically and comprehensively.
Thanks, Gary. Derek, let's hear from you next.
Hi, how's everyone doing? I'm Derek Mueller. I'm with DHS CISA. I'm the Cybersecurity Advisor State Coordinator for Pennsylvania, and I work with the state, local, tribal, territorial side, private sector, and really anybody in the critical infrastructure industry side and the critical sector. So kind of do a little bit of everything with, basically being a risk advisor to everybody and helping them, get the services they need, either technical or on-site assessments.
Thanks, Derek. Great to have you back.
Thanks.
And Jeff, over to you.
Absolutely. My name is Jeff Reichert. I work in the Office of the CTO on the product strategy team at Veeam Software Corporation. We make enterprise backup software. And this being an age where ransomware is such a hot topic, we have a lot of conversations with analysts and with our public sector customers about how they can be safe from ransomware and the stance they're taking and the steps that they're going through right now.
Fantastic. So we are expecting at least one more panelist to be joining us. So whenever that person pops in, we'll have him introduce himself. Otherwise, let's just go ahead and get started. Sherry, I'd love to start with you on the first question, if you don't mind. And my question is, how have you seen agency security posture change in the last several years due to ransomware?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. And I know that we're going to be talking a lot about ransomware in the next hour, given the kind of significance of attacks that we've seen. We've seen a lot of really significant incidents in the past few years, and that's really kind of highlighting the significance and the growth in cybersecurity risks. I think speaking from the work that we do at NIST in terms of developing resources, the thing that we've noticed that might be different about ransomware than other similar incidents is kind of that immediate business impact, due to the loss of data and systems. And so organizations really need to be prepared ahead of time for their response and recovery. And so that means that we've seen a lot of organizations really doubling down on kind of having strong cybersecurity risk management processes, having procedures in place. And that's also kind of served to kind of raise the bar, the security bar more generally, and help organizations respond to kind of all incidents, not just ransomware. And these are all kind of cybersecurity outcomes that we've included in various, cybersecurity guidance in NIST, as well as other agencies, as well as those that are included in the cybersecurity framework. I'll point out that NIST developed a cybersecurity framework profile specifically for ransomware that tailors the framework outcomes and lets organizations know kind of why each outcome is important in the ransomware context. And so, it's things like making sure that organizations have identified critical data and systems, having that strong governance and kind of understanding of roles and responsibilities in place so that leadership can make good business decisions when they're under stress, having clear communication plans, having clear response plans in place so that you can act when, certain systems or email are down. And so, we want to make sure that NIST resources are helpful to all of you, and so looking forward to learning from you and learning from the other panelists to make sure that the guidance that we're putting out is actually helpful to address the current challenges that folks are facing, especially in the case of ransomware.
Thank you, Sherry. And Derek, would you like to respond to that same question as well?
Sure. Security postures at organizations are constantly changing to keep up with, the threat actors and, other, maybe insider threats, external threats. But really what I've seen since ransomware has come out is, really taking a step back and looking at, hey, what are our assets? What's our training program look like? What's our password policy? Implementing multi-factor authentication. I think that's probably one of the hugest things that's come out is really looking at that. And also with ransomware, training your employees. I mean, everything's always all about training, but training the employees and making sure that they understand, hey, this is how we could get infected, or this is how we could get this malware on the systems, and this is how somebody could get into our systems, and this is how basically we should train the employees on what not to do. So you'll see like phishing campaigns, or you may have somebody come in there and send out spoofed emails to see who's going to click on it. There's a lot of training programs like that they never used to have before. So I think that's really important to have. Also, just understanding what you have with, patching, antivirus, what are you using? Is it up to date? And like I said, policies and procedures. So let's say you do get a ransomware attack and you don't know what to do. So, testing out the incident response plan, your disaster recovery plan, and just making sure that you could still stay operational if you do get, hacked.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Derek. And would any of our other panelists like to comment on this here before we have William introduce himself?
This is Gary Stevens. What I'd like to say is that, first of all, as it relates to Sherry's question, I think what NIST has done has been immensely helpful, immensely helpful in a lot of ways, specifically that it acts as just kind of a guidepost for everybody to kind of operate against, and as in essence as a standard by which we can, and bellwether for which we can assess ourselves against. And that works nicely in conjunction with what OMB has done from the 14028 standpoint, et cetera. And I think Derek also hit it on the head with the fact that it's training. I think it's really been a very extensive effort, predominantly due in part by the remote and hybrid environment that we're working in, to ensure that personnel are trained adequately on what to expect from ransomware and the like, phishing, etc. There's really been heavy emphasis on that, and specifically at the Department of Education, but just I think holistically across the federal space, I think that's helped immensely. So hats off to both individuals for the comments that they made.
Absolutely. And William, thank you for joining us. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry about that. I hope you can hear me.
Okay, we can, yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm sorry, I had some technical difficulties. I think I clicked on the wrong link from yesterday, but I'm William Bush. I'm the cybersecurity branch and actually cybersecurity and compliance branch lead for Deputy Commandant for Information at Headquarters Marine Corps, DCI, IC4. I've been serving this position now for about 3 weeks. I was previously the cyber branch head and lead SCA for Marine Corps Systems Command in Quantico, Virginia. So thank you for having me. I'm sorry, and obviously I'm an offsite today and yesterday, so I'm here in my car. So just I hope it's okay.
Yeah, of course. Don't apologize. We're happy to have you here. And I think I joked in our prep call that we've seen people taking these from their cars before, but it wasn't a joke, obviously. So great to have you here, William. Thank you. All right. So if you look, or if you know of any agencies or commands that have been attacked, what did that recovery process look like? So Gary or Sherry or William, whoever would like to respond to that. Do we have any examples or use cases that we could quickly provide for our audience?
Even anonymized, perhaps, since I know when, as someone who talks with customers, both public and private sector, about having been attacked, I know folks typically are not authorized to talk about specifics, but everybody knows everybody. And if you could even speak to some of the cases that you've run into or things you've heard anonymized from other agencies, that would be great.
Or Jeff, if you have any that you would like to share, and we'll just, keep the names quiet, obviously.
Well, it's interesting. We help customers all the time with ransomware attacks, and you would think that it wouldn't be as much of an issue for federal customers, that we'd be having a conversation about advanced persistent threat actors aiming for other sorts of exploits than ransomware, because the federal government as a policy doesn't pay ransomware. And so it's still interesting to me that, at least from the Veeam standpoint, I don't think that there's been a conversation that we've had with a public sector customer, whether we're talking state and local or federal level, that has not gone into ransomware resiliency and ransomware recovery for at least the last year and a half, probably the last 2.5 years. So I know it's very actively on folks' minds, despite the fact that you would think ransomware criminals wouldn't be targeting federal entities because the chances of getting paid would be less than targeting other entities. They obviously still are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Did anyone else have any comments about that? Okay, because we do have an audience question that came through, so I'll direct you guys over to the Q&A. Gary Sims asks, do you consider cyber ranges as viable training tools, and are they commonly used for training? So I'm not sure who that's directed towards, but if you have any thoughts on that, William, I see you just came off mute.
Yeah, this I'm assuming the question wasn't directed towards me. However, we have had experiences where we've set up a range where we've simulated about 90 to 95% of what our Marine Corps enterprise will look like. And it's given us a chance to test out different things, actually, be able to see how we'll recover from different, attacks. We've pushed, red team, blue team type of things on it. So it's helped us out quite immensely. We really stood this up probably about 3 years ago. And we're still in the process of trying to figure out how to continue to refine, but it's definitely added to the ability for us to respond quickly to different issues and items as if they were to arise. So I definitely see the point, to focus in on getting a cyber range, because you can do things there that you just won't do on your regular network, and allows you to respond much quicker and to different instances. So it's definitely worth the investment if you do it right and try to really simulate as much as you could of your actual network itself.
Yeah, that was a great response. Thank you. Does anyone else want to respond to that? Okay, well, let's pop up our first poll question then, and then we'll jump to my next question. So first poll question up on the screen, should be up in a second. There you go. How often do you test your cyber incident response plan? Please respond if it's yearly, quarterly, monthly, or something else. All right, William, this next question is going to you first. Are you evaluating solutions differently as a result of ransomware and other APT actors?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again? I'm sorry, I had the poll question up in front of me, so.
Totally fine. Are you evaluating solutions differently as a result of ransomware and other APT actors?
Absolutely. We're looking now, we have to look a little deeper than we did in the past at, where we get the different applications or get things from, how they're built, by who they're manufactured by, the developers. So we have to take a much deeper look into those items now than we used to in the past. Openware, open source, those type of things. So we've kind of moved away from those, and we're trying to do more. I hate to say this, I know GOTS is not a great word because they're like, we're rebuilding things, but the trust factor has become huge with ransomware being so prominent, not knowing where some of the software is developed or who's behind the development. And we have a lot of programs, I'll just say, across the Department of Defense that we want to use a lot of these COTS products and openware and open source code type of, software applications. However, if you can't, see where it's coming from, and you get into the supply chain risk management type of thing, right? So it's really knowing where it comes from, how to make sure that you can properly know, who's using it and things of that nature, because of feedbacks and things of that nature. It's kind of hard to do, even when you do source code review on a lot of these applications. So we have ramped up quite a bit of getting more involved in the software development piece than we have in the past, if that answers the question.
Fantastic, thank you. And Derek, I'm going to bounce that question over to you as well.
Okay, yeah. Piggyback off William there, really looking at, finding the approved products list on the DoD side. I definitely know they use that, but, even on the private sector and critical infrastructure side, they can definitely, get that information, looking at your trusted vendors. And also, obviously, like I always call them mom and pop, but for the smaller organizations that may not have that wider reach across, joint information sharing organizations like, the MSI SAC or Sector ISACs, CISA, just joining those groups, they can learn like, hey, what's a trusted vendor? What's a trusted, product? Something that's already been evaluated. And on the flip side of going out and doing the assessments after, with ransomware coming out and everything else, we have to look at things a little different. So now we're actually starting to look at, external dependencies. Hey, what are you using for a VPN solution? What are you using for your IT support? So we're looking at those avenues as well to see what their risk resiliency is as well.
Thank you, Derek. And
Thanks.
Anyone else on the panel have anything that they would like to share based on what Derek and William just said?
Yeah, Kirsten, this is Gary Stevens again. What I'd say is that, I think there's been an evolution on how we go about evaluating solutions. I think there was a point in time where we were looking at specific activities that we needed to cover with specific tools. And so it was a onesie twosie kind of activity. Now I think there's been a lot of push to look holistically, architecturally, how do these tools work in tandem with one another. I think the CDM effort through DHS has really been pivotal to that. I think some of the things that NIST has been recommending with some of their new policies and that sort of thing, as well as you move towards the 14028 and some of those other OMB specific memorandums, some of which, I think William touched on it with the supply chain risk management kind of concept. So, ransomware ATP type actors are part of that calculation and calculus, but it's really been a big push to look, where do these tools fit? How do we evaluate them in the context of how they fit within the overall enterprise? and meet a specific requirement set or fill a gap in seam? And then how does that translate into how we're benefiting the business in its execution? So I think it has been, but it hasn't been just specific to ransomware or ATP. I think it's just been part of an evolution that we've had to follow to be better stewards of IT and IT dollars.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate you chiming in on that. Anyone else on the panel like to add to that? Sherry?
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, I think all of the panelists mentioned the importance of supply chain and mentioned EO 14028. I mean, NIST put out a lot of recent guidance, as directed under that executive order, including, an update to the secure software development framework that talks about, secure software development best practices, and updated our supply chain guidance and guidance for overseeing the security of critical software. And so like supply chain's really a very popular topic the last few years, based off of the incidents that we've been seeing. And all of this is new guidance that's now been required by OMB for federal agencies. And so the implementation on that is really just starting, but it's really kind of represented much more scrutiny on, the importance of how, how procurement has changed, how the importance of supply chain kind of has elevated in conversations about cybersecurity.
Thank you, Sherry. Any other comments there? Okay, well, for our panelists, I'd like to direct your attention over to our Q&A chat because we have a bit of a lengthy question from Stan Wiseman. So give you guys a minute to read through that and prepare any responses. But in the meantime, for our audience at home, we're going to pop up poll question number 2. So you can expect to see that on your screen here shortly. All right, poll question number 2. Have you changed the way that you secure primary and backup storage to avoid threat actors deleting primary or backup data? Please go ahead and respond to that. And then for our panelists, I'm going to bring it back to our question from Stan. Biden's cybersecurity EO calls on threat intel sharing to be improved, but the historical barrier has been an unwillingness for private sector to do so with the public sector due to concerns about what the private sector will do with that information, and also some concerns that private sector does not always receive the initial public sector actually has. What do you foresee will need to happen in order for us to improve in this area? And as you consider the means on how to better improve and accelerate detection capabilities, what role are you envisioning that ML and AI will play? Are you beginning to see positive outcomes where ML and AI is improving detection and response times and thus a reduction of threat actor dwell time? So if you need another minute to mull that over, but whenever you're ready, please go ahead and come off mute and can share your responses with us. And industry, if you guys have any thoughts around that too, please feel free to share them.
I think it's a really good question. Speaking from having worked both sides of this equation, from the public sector side and the private sector side, obviously on the public sector side in government, there's a tremendous amount of insight over activities within the government's infrastructure, attacks and events that will never be seen by the private sector. This is sometimes our challenge, is that we're operating somewhat blind or by inference only, and sort of the uncertain nature of intel anyway. On the flip side of this, we are thankfully supported by CISA and by other entities in making us aware of vulnerabilities across a broad variety of different platforms. And I think perhaps the Log4j hack some 6 months back was one of the best examples of how industry was alerted broadly via the government's alerting mechanisms, and we're able to take affirmative action to mitigate that vulnerability across almost all of our platforms. And it's pretty terrifying in that that particular vulnerability affected virtually every commercial IT system on the market, because we all largely use Java to great extents, and the logging mechanisms as well. So these are things where could there perhaps be a more robust mechanism or leveraging existing assets within the private sector, such as our security personnel, for those of us who have, facility security officers and are part of the defense security systems. There may be a way for us to expand that, expanding the roles or expanding the access of those individuals to be the liaisons between the public sector and the private sector to ensure that we can have a robust and well-rounded security apparatus to ensure that private industry is moving in concert to address the general cybersecurity needs of the nation. And Derek, this is probably right up your alley, honestly, and on the DSS side as well. But we are not intending to design insecure systems by any means. Frankly, we're trying to build a robust capability that can be consumed with confidence by consumers in all areas. And unironically, thanks to Cheryl and her staff over at NIST, there's a well-defined set of security controls in NIST SP 800-53 and 800-171 that often guide how we build our software. And it's really almost the security framework becomes the building code for what we are building within industry, both on the software and the hardware side. So we have a security boundary, and we try to build within that code so that we know that we can quickly certify our things with NIST and NIAP, for FIPS and for common criteria validation across the globe. So these are, there is a certain level where you need to build products that meet a generally accepted set of security standards, or else you might as well, nobody's going to buy them. So there is an enlightened self-interest on the industry side to ensure we're making things that can be safely consumed by our customers.
Thank you, Nick.
Sure.
I'm going to piggyback off Nick there, just to kind of go back to Stan's question. I know there's a lot of resources out there for, threat and intel sharing, but under CISA's page, if you kind of dig down to the automated indicator sharing, that basically will take you to an area to where you can sign up to get that, the cyber threat indicators and defensive measures. And it's a collaboration to where if you actually go down under that to how to participate in AIS, it will give you the steps on, how to sign up for those services to get that information. But it's more of educating the private sector and everybody that's available to them.
Thank you, Derek.
You're welcome.
Okay, anyone else on the panel?
I'll just chime in a little bit more on the question about information sharing. While there's stuff that the public sector sees that private sector will never see necessarily, right? Different attacks that are coming at federal entities or public sector entities. We are seeing a lot of regulatory steps. It's still fragmented right now, but we are seeing a lot more mandates come out around required reporting of cyber incidents that will help with information sharing and helping with us get there. One very recently is the New York Department of Financial Services has upped the reporting requirements for every regulated financial entity doing business in New York. And if you think about banking in New York, that's kind of a lot of financial entities. So there's a lot of private sector entities that now will have under the proposed guidelines much more stringent rapid reporting requirements. And we're seeing that kind of thing roll out around privacy and around reporting and a lot of other frameworks too. So it is still patchwork, but I'm at least cautiously optimistic that the information sharing mechanisms we've got in place are getting better through a combination of the tools that Derek was just referring to and things like MS-ISAC and regulatory frameworks catching up with the threats that we're all dealing with right now.
Yeah, Kirsten, I would also chime in. I think Jeff is on point. I think one of the pivotal issue though for the private sector is that if a particular threat affects them, I think there's a massive concern with liability and what it's going to mean to their bottom line. So I think until that specific issue gets addressed in some capacity, I think there's going to be a reluctance in some instances to engage in threat sharing, unless there's some type of anonymization type of scenario that can play out where it subsequently gets shared in a wide fashion that this threat happened. It's just not attributable to one specific entity or another. But I do also want to say that, what CISA has done from that space as far as intel sharing, specifically on the federal space, but also just in general, consistent with what was said earlier, has been immensely helpful. And I think Log4j was one of those, kind of watershed moments where all of a sudden people are like, yeah, we need to share this information. We need one entity to kind of centralize it and organize it. And so I think that's been very, very helpful. So I think it's an evolution. But I think until the crux of the issue gets addressed with the ability to ensure that the entity that reports it is not going to be, held in some type of, or have massive liability against it, I think we'll struggle with it a little bit.
Thank you, Gary. And Sherry, did you want to chime in? I saw you came off mute.
Yeah, I can help answer the second question on artificial intelligence, and curious if other panelists are actually using AI for intrusion detection. But a few years ago, when I was on the Senate Commerce Committee, we had a hearing called "The Promise and Perils of Artificial Intelligence for Cybersecurity," and I think that's pretty consistent with the way that NIST thinks about the overlap between AI and cybersecurity. Clearly, artificial intelligence has a lot of promises for cybersecurity. In terms of intrusion detection, you're basically looking for a needle in a haystack, and there's no way to do that without some form of automation. And so AI has a lot of promises to help with that. I think on the other hand, though, is that some of the work that NIST has been doing on AI trustworthiness is focused on, the risks associated with AI, and there are security risks with AI too, that need to be carefully considered. Just like when you are looking at the security of any software, I think that there's a certain level of risk associated with the different kind of security and reliability and robustness and explainability and safety associated with AI systems. And so that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right, anything else here before we move on to the next question? Okay, well, thank you, Stan, for sending in the question. Again, over to our audience questions. Daniel O'Shea writes in, what are the panelist organizations doing today to prepare for migration to post-quantum cryptography standards? Is this an urgent or non-urgent consideration? Good question, Daniel. What do the folks on the panel have to respond with on that?
Well, this is Nick. I'll speak from our perspective. So all of the platforms we build store all of the data that we store encrypted at rest. And currently we use AES 256, which has been assessed to be extremely resilient to quantum cryptographic hacking methods. However, every protocol and every standard evolves over time. So recently, I believe it was today, it was announced that the government needs to prepare to move to post-quantum cryptographic implementations by 2035. Mm-hmm. That's 13 years from now. That's probably a reasonable time horizon to develop and assess, post-quantum cryptographic mechanisms and modules within our systems. You see, it's a very simple correction. It is relatively straightforward to implement a new cryptographic scheme. It's a whole nother story to get that tested and validated by an external third-party accreditor, and I'm looking at NIST, because everybody and their brother has to do that cryptographic validation. It takes a lot of time and a tremendous amount of resources and a tremendous amount of money to make it happen. So the fact that we have a long time horizon for the implementation of PQC is actually a benefit both to industry and to the government. I don't anticipate that there will be tremendous impacts within the product development side and product availability perspective. It will be a matter of when the government starts mandating that these are canonically and exclusively the cryptographic mechanisms that have to be implemented. So that there won't be any resistance by industry to ultimately adopt it, but it will take time. So we're, from our perspective, we're grateful for having a long horizon to prove that we can implement it, make it efficient and functional, and then meet the standards for certification and accreditation of the cryptographic modules themselves.
Thank you, Nick. Let's go.
I was,
William.
oh yes, I was just going to back up what Nick has stated. I think he made a great point. Do I think it's urgent and, we're going to move to this, right away? I just don't see it happening that fast. It takes some time to turn on some of these things, right? The funding, like you said, making sure we're doing it across the board. And I'm not speaking for the whole DoD. Obviously, I'm speaking, for Marine Corps on the side of the house. But it's very difficult to turn on the drop of a dime to sit and say we're going to implement this right away. It takes a lot of testing. We have to make sure, we can implement it across the entire Marine Corps, and it has to be interoperable with other services. So there's quite a bit of things that go into. So I guess to answer the question is short, I don't see it being right on the cusp, but we have to do it right now. But it definitely is in the vision and the horizon of where we need to be going. But I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in on that.
Yeah, and Kirsten, if I could chime in on that, I think they're exactly right. There's such a long time horizon. I think what is more of the urgent and compelling requirement at this particular point is to figure out where our data is and how is that being protected as a preemptive strike, so that it, it's not going to be exfilled or anything along those lines. And then subsequent be, once they get some type of quantum computing capacity to break the encryption, be vulnerable in that capacity. I think that's the more urgent and compelling requirement, is make sure that the data at rest is protected, data in transit is protected, encrypted, and that we are monitoring it holistically with the entire security suite so that it does not get exfiltrated. I think that's the urgent and compelling requirement.
Thank you, Gary.
And to Gary's point, it's that old axiom of know thyself, right? What do we have? Where is it? Who's the custodian? What's it used for? All of these things, they form an integral part of every agency's, and I don't just mean government agencies, but every organization's data strategy. It's really first knowing what it is we've got, and then figuring out how we take all the steps to manage it the way we're supposed to in order to ensure its integrity and protection, et cetera. It sounds so fundamental, but it is tremendously difficult because data proliferates in such great quantities. And frankly, there's also the historicity factor. There's data that predates any of our tenure. And you think about the Internal Revenue Service's huge challenge, and Social Security Administration says they got to retain data for 100 years. Unless anybody's been keeping score at home, we've been filing income taxes since 1916. That's 106 years of data. And a lot of it existed before even the dawn of computers. So you got to carry it forward, and it's a tremendous challenge just to get your arms around what is in bankers' boxes and archives somewhere. And then do we digitize it? What do we do with it? These are all, I've always said, I'm not a storage guy because I love storage. I'm a former intelligence analyst. I do what I do because I love data and how we can leverage it and support it and protect it. So these are all the things that you have to think about when, to Gary's point, you're trying to figure out how to defend the enterprise. It's just like, where are the things that are vulnerable or exposed or valuable for that matter? So thank you.
Thank you. And Sherry, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, so NIST has been working on PQC standardization efforts for several years now, and we're the one leading the effort to develop the PQC standard. We have, I think as one of the panelists mentions, there's cryptographic transitions that happen all the time. And we hear complaints about all of them. I think this one's going to be a big one. I think that's why folks are talking about it. This is going to be a really big transition, and that's why, we're starting early in the process for the transition. So in terms of timeline, NIST just recently announced the finalists for our selection for algorithms, and then we hope to, in the next 2 years, publish the post-quantum cryptography standards. Right now, we're asking organizations to kind of do that inventory and prioritize systems for transition. We are with the goal that once the standard is released, folks are ready to be able to do that transition. I think the concern isn't so much with, will federal agencies be able to make the transition? It's will, state and local agencies be able to make the transition? Will local law enforcement be able to make the transition within 10 years? And so, we're also pushing folks to think about how can we support those really all across the nation to make this transition when it is time to make the transition.
Thank you, Sherry. All right, any other comments here? Jeff?
I'm glad that Sherry spoke up, because I think probably Nick and I and everybody on the industry side have been following NIST's work with the whole post-quantum computing. That they released finalists from round 3 back in July, and I think we all been following the news on that, and round 4 is coming up. So yeah, we're keeping a close eye on it, because it's obviously going to affect everything that we do around data encryption at rest and in transmission. So thank you for the work on that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Okay, and then our last audience question for now, unless we get a couple more here in the next minute or two. Many agencies invested in their cyber strategy with initial focus on preventing an attack and then mobilizing a response should the attack occur. With the unfortunate prevalence of ransomware today, are you seeing an increased focus or investment on recovery efforts?
This is Derek. I can add just a couple of things on this. You're putting probably just as much in for, protecting yourself as you are with the recovery effort. And if you've heard the keywords nowadays, cyber insurance or cyber breach insurance or anything like that, you're throwing more money for insurance because of, the ransomware incidents and other, exploitations of someone's organization. But other than that, it's really the testing. You are putting a lot more time into testing out your incident response plan, your disaster recovery plan, everything like that. So that's more people hours. That's, more money being thrown at recovery efforts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Derek.
And,
yeah,
I would just like to say, from a Marine Corps standpoint, one of the things I harp on is actually working more on the recovery practice, because you never know when something's going to happen. But what is the plan to take care of it? I think we spend so much time and focus on building and implementing and building things that we don't spend as much time and money in the recovery, right? We have backups. We make sure we have stuff, offsite or something like that, and we don't practice enough. So one thing I've been harping on is getting people to understand, let's do this recovery efforts. Let's look at things. We never know anything's going to happen, but we put so much money up front, and in the end, I think the sustainment and maintenance of a system or systems or applications, we just don't focus enough on those efforts. You never hear anybody say, let's throw a lot of money into that. But that's the operation and maintenance and sustainment is the most expensive part of a system, is maintaining it over years, right? You build it, year, 2 years or whatever, and you maintain it for 15 to 20 years. But we don't put the money sometimes into the testing, into doing recoveries and practicing as often as we should be doing. And I'm not saying this is everybody. Again, I just see what I see from a development standpoint, acquisition life cycle of these systems, right? Even though that's the longest part of the life cycle, we don't put as much effort and time into it because we're already moving on to the next thing. Once we built this, what do we build next? Instead of saying, okay, how do we sustain this and do it the right way? So I think more focus needs to be put on those efforts. But again, I'm just speaking from my perspective. But I know many of the panel members have the same concerns or even different. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Yeah, any other panelists?
Yeah, Kirsten, if you're okay with it, I was gonna, basically say, ideally, we wouldn't be spending enormous amounts in the respond and recover area because that means something's already happened, right? But so I'm going to give again another shout out to NIST. So I think what has really been very, very beneficial is the fact that, through the CSF and the components, it's really made us think about the various, the framework core, if you will, the identify all the way down to recover, and where our dollars are getting spent and the adequacy of those dollars and doing what they need to do within each one of those various, buckets, if you will, to function down to the category level. so that, we are being very, very good stewards of our dollars within that framework. Ideally you want to spend more on the identify and protect and detect, if you will, than you would on the respond and recover, because you don't want the actual incident to happen. But, to William's earlier point, you got to be able to spend some money in those areas as well, because you have to be able to and capable of responding and recovering. But what I would say is that it has just really, through that framework, it's really made you think holistically what you are or are not doing and where the dollars can be best spent to fill in those gaps and seams so that you do have a holistic model. And I think that's really what is the predominant takeaway from all of this, is that you want to make sure that you have a smooth oiled machine that's covering all those various categories and functions.
And this is Nick, and somebody teed up a softball for Pure Storage and Veeam here, which was great. For decades, we've focused on backup oftentimes as it's a necessary requirement in virtually any system, but we didn't really focus on recovery so much. Yes, we backed up the data, and the time frame in which we could recover that data wasn't necessarily deemed particularly critical. I'd say 10 to 15 years ago, especially when government agencies started focusing on continuity of operations, that's when we started discovering that while backup is great, we've got the data, recovery becomes a critical capability in continuity of operations and recovery operations. We don't want, to Gary's point, we don't want to find ourselves victims of a data unavailability incident or disruption in operations because we were hacked. But there are any number of other reasons why systems may go down. And Taylor Lee asked a really good question that I'm going to address tangentially here. There are weather events, there are geological events, seismological events, electrical events. All of these things happen and take systems down. And we may have to recover data from a remote location or to a remote location in order to reestablish operations or maintain continuity of operations. So rather than think about this as a storage or a data recovery issue, you really need to think about this in context of it's a data service infrastructure that drives the most valuable asset in every one of our organizations, the information off of which we work to make policies, to make decisions, and deliver constituent services and enable our workforce. So is our data service infrastructure capable of delivering primary data service for applications and users, secondary data service for test, development, prototyping, archive, and then sharing that off to intermediate recovery, backup, and long-term archive? There's a whole continuum of data lifecycle and data utility that has to be thought about from a functional aspect. What are we doing with this data? Do we have the tools and the technology and the processes that enable us to get the effect and the outcomes we're looking for today and into the future, with an eye towards, is it also sustainable? Not just financially, that's huge, but also environmentally. So all of these things are of a piece. And I probably have more conversations about data recovery, continuity of operations, and resourcing than virtually any other set of topics. But the good news is we live in a fantastic time, technology-wise, to enable all of those capabilities while controlling really while controlling or avoiding unnecessary sustainment cost.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. That is a great question for Pure and Veeam, and we work together since we have a strong alliance, helping customers with that kind of issue all the time. As a couple of people have already said, we used to think about backup windows and think less about recovery windows, and now we have to think about recovery windows, especially with the advent of cyber attacks, because now we're not just recovering from what used to be the most common scenario, which is a given system goes down or a given set of systems, or data is lost, files, a database, whatever. Now we're talking about restoring entire sets of servers or workloads that are actively being attacked and having to think about whether the infrastructure we're restoring them on is compromised, and knowing that when we're doing the restore, we also have to mitigate, because dwell times are still pretty long, against malware or exploits that might be part of that backed up data set that's now being restored. So all those kind of considerations go into recovery. And 15 years ago, they kind of didn't, right? We weren't necessarily recovering in the face of an active adversary who had placed exploits on our system that they were going to reactivate unless we were very careful in the recovery process. So the landscape's changed a lot. And I think Nick and I, and probably everyone on the call has this kind of conversation all the time because it's a very different environment than it used to be.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, and then this is the last call for audience questions. So send them in now or we will run out of time. There we go, we got another one. Taylor Lee asks, is climate change and environmental risks included in disaster and recovery plans? And is it playing a critical role in how investment decisions are made?
Yeah, just a quick blurb on that. If any organization is doing a proper risk assessment, that should take into account, environmental, technical, any type of, disaster that could possibly happen, and take that into account when, funding for, any solution.
Now,
Yep.
I will, yeah, and let me jump in here. I would say that from a Marine Corps standpoint, and we have to take that into account. We have places all over the world, right? Different environments, different areas. So one of the things we do take into account is where they're located, weather conditions, natural disaster, over and over type of conditions that we have to look at and take an account for. So we have taken a look at putting more money into, if you're one of these places where natural disasters, happens quite regular, how do we back up and do things, restore quickly from another site? And I think Jeff made a good point. I really wish I'd have jumped in on the restoring a known good, right? When's the last time you've done that? But that's for another time. But so we do take into account, we have to. We have no choice because of the locations that we have so many different systems or where we have Marines located at. So we've put more money in some spots than we have in others, unfortunately, but that's just the nature of the game.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Okay, well, Brian Yunes writes in, thank you all for your service. Really appreciate the responses and candid discussion, and I have to agree with him. Let's go ahead and put up poll question number 3 on our screen. That'll be our last one before we begin our wrap up. If an attack happens, what does your remediation timeline look like for your most critical systems? Minutes, hours, days, or weeks? Please go ahead and respond to that. And I believe we are done with our audience questions. Okay, I think we can fit in one more. Richard Halliger writes in, given the wide array of organizations represented in the panel, with respect to the various post-incident activities, which activity has been the most efficient for you, such as, is it lessons learned, report writing, stakeholder writing, or perhaps something else?
For me on my side, I have to say lessons learned. I just get straight to it. Lessons learned. I've learned more about, you just don't know sometimes on, how things will go and what will happen and conditions, people, and what kind of attack you're going to have and things of that nature. So we've learned a lot from past experience, unfortunately, but it's documenting those lessons learned, accurately, so we can come back and figure out how to address it the next time around. Not just when it happens, but how to be more proactive to address those. I think in one of the questions we talked about, one of the panel members said, hey, we need to be, trying to protect ourselves instead of just saying, hey, let's, make sure we put money towards backups. But, recovery is part of that. But that piece is getting the lessons learned, knowing how to implement something from the start. To make sure when you get there. But again, something else can happen. I mean, it's an ever-evolving world out here in cybersecurity. So you can't protect against everything. But I would say lessons learned from my end. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Anyone else?
Kirsten, I would say lessons learned as well, because I think, everything William stated, but also I think what it does is it allows for a facilitation of a broad range of views that get summarily kind of discussed and then ultimately identified, and then they get kind of reconciled, and then you can do something with them. And I think that's the most important thing, is that taking those lessons learned and actually doing something about them is, I think, one of the critical things. So the lessons learned really help facilitate that.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, well, we only have about 5 minutes left of our discussion, so I want to do a roundup of takeaways from each of our panelists. So you have about a minute to share with us before we run out of time. Just what you think is the most important thing out of this whole conversation. And because I work for Dale Carnegie, I always love to tie it back to leadership. So whatever that may look like for you, please share that with us. And I want to thank you all again for being a part of this discussion today. So Derek, can we start with you, please?
Sure. I think the biggest takeaway, I think I always say this, is nobody's alone out there in this world of, cybersecurity. Take part in, these panel discussions. You got a lot of experienced people on this panel here, a lot of good knowledge, experience. And, if you ever have questions, just like what we're asked today, always reach out. Like I said, not alone, take part in information sharing groups. And I think you'll be on your way to success.
Thank you so much, Derek.
Okay.
Let's jump to William next, please.
I would say be flexible, be open-minded, think outside the box. And I'm going to agree with Derek. I've learned a lot from private industry. Private industry seems to do things a little faster than we do on this side. I'll be honest with you. I mean, they do things a little faster. They've already dealt with a few things that we have not had the opportunity to deal with. So it gives us that lessons learned that we were just talking about, and we're able to incorporate. So always be open-minded, share in the community, and discuss with public and private sector. It'd be great. We can get to that point. But that's my take. And I appreciate you guys for having me on. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's jump to Sherry next.
Yeah, thank you so much for the discussion today. I agree with the comment that was just made about kind of the importance of panels like this to talk about cybersecurity, because it really is a challenging topic for everyone, and everyone's kind of at a different place in their cybersecurity journey. The folks on the panel today also really reemphasize, the importance of having kind of senior management involved in cybersecurity, all really senior folks on the panel today, and the importance of having senior leadership take cybersecurity seriously, and making sure that organizations are considering, cybersecurity risks along with, any other risks to an organization, financial risk and things like that. There are also a lot of cybersecurity resources. We talked a bit about, the NIST cybersecurity framework is one resource that, can be helpful to kind of comprehensively address cybersecurity. So you're not just considering, protection or recovery, but, all 5 functions are important, to reiterate what Gary had said earlier. And so, just a shameless plug for the work at NIST. We are updating the cybersecurity framework. It's going to be a major update. It's going to take, at least a year, and certainly invite all of you to participate in that and join that effort to make sure that, the resources that we're providing are effective and relevant to address the current risks that you're facing today.
Thank you, Sherry. Let's jump to Jeff next.
So thank you to all the government panelists, participants today. Really appreciated hearing your insights. I'll just echo something that Sherry just mentioned. I had the pleasure of listening to both Chris Inglis, who's our National Cyber Director, and Jen Easterly, who heads Derek's organization. She's the director of CISA, speak yesterday morning. They both emphasized the point that cybersecurity is not the responsibility of the CISO or of somebody in IT. At this point, it's the responsibility of senior leadership to the very top levels of the organization. And as Sherry just pointed out, I think the seniority of the people on this panel and what we've heard today also bears that out. So thanks very much for y'all's time. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Let's jump to Gary next.
I would just say onward and upwards, keep pushing the boundaries, be relentless, and, constantly question old paradigms. Don't get stuck in the mud. You can do a lot, and there's a lot of technology, but look at it comprehensively and holistically.
Thank you so much, Gary. And Nick, let's wrap it up with you.
Sure. And I think my best advice is obviously have a strategy, but more importantly, know what the defined outcomes you want to achieve are. Build the strategy from that. We obviously in industry, we're always eager to speak with people who have these challenges. We've seen a lot from across our customer base. We're generally very well attuned to changes in the state of the art. Of course, we help evolve some of the state of the art too. So my job is to be a technical advisor. I am always happy to engage. I'm always interested in hearing what challenges are and hoping to shape, refine, and strengthen the data strategies in all of our customers and across all of our organizations. Everybody said it. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. It really is good guys versus bad guys, and the good guys have to band together. So thank you. Thank you all very much today for a fantastic panel, and thank you to the audience as well.
Yeah, thank you. Well said. We will have our next webinar posted up here on the page if you're interested. But again, thank you to our partners at Veeam and Pure Storage and our awesome panelists and the folks at home for tuning in. You guys sent in some really great questions. I think it sparked a lot of really great conversation. And with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. We'll see you at the next one. And if you'd like your CPE credit emailed to you, please go ahead and respond to our last poll question. All right, guys, talk to you later. Talk to you to the next one. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
See you.